welcome. My name is Susan Cohen, and I am the Associate Vice Chancellor of Alumni and Constituent Engagement here at Washington University. On behalf of the Washington University Alumni Association, it is my pleasure to welcome you to Wednesdays with WashU, Finding Fellowship, featuring three outstanding members of the Washington University community. Wednesdays with WashU is a webinar series featuring alumni and parents from around the world. Throughout the year, we've had the opportunity to bring inspiring and exciting Washington University stories into your home. It is now my honor to introduce Mary McKay, who will introduce and moderate our discussion today. Mary McKay is the Vice Provost for Interdisciplinary Initiatives at Washington University. In this role, she works to enhance interdisciplinary research and education across the campus and to build the collaborations needed to ensure the successful implementation of the university's strategic plan. Prior to joining the office of the Provost, Mary served as the Neidorff Family and Centene Corporation Dean of the Brown School. With more than 200 publications, Mary brings a wealth of critical scholarship and leadership in the areas of poverty, mental health, and the health prevention needs of poverty-impacted youth and families. Before I ask Mary to introduce our two guests, I would like to also extend a special welcome to Jason and Amani, who we'll meet shortly. Jason and Amani have both been very active alumni volunteers. Jason currently serves on our Alumni Association Board of Governors, and Amani serves as co-chair of the Black Alumni Council chapter in Washington, D.C. Thank you both for everything you do for WashU. Now I'll turn it over to Mary, who will formally introduce our speakers. Thank you, Mary, for joining us today.
So Susan, thank you. Thank you, Liz. Thank you to your team for organizing this evening for us. And I just feel incredibly honored to introduce our two speakers. And I can actually really hardly wait to hear what they have to say. These are a set of amazing alums. And so let me first thank our audience for being with us this evening and tell you a little bit about how I see our evening kind of unfolding. You're going to see very shortly myself and our two guest speakers. We're going to talk and generate, I hope, a very lively conversation so that you can hear about Jason and Amani's the backstory of this film and where they think this work can make an impact. After that first, I would say 30 minutes, we're going to open it up for questions and answers to all of you. So please use the question and answer button, use the chat function to be able to really ask your questions, and these speakers I know will have amazing answers. So first, let me introduce Jason Green. And if you're back there, Jason, come on and bring yourself here. So I have a professional bio that I could read about Jason. And so I know he doesn't want me to, but I'm going to say a couple of things. You are an attorney, an entrepreneur, a thought leader on economic opportunity and the future of work. And so, you know that I could read that you have your bachelor's degree from WashU. You might have gone to law school at that place called Yale University. We might have heard of it. We might also know a little bit in your bio that you worked for Barack Obama and in the White House. So you have an amazing professional trajectory. Before I introduce Amani, I want you to tell me a couple of things, Jason, that we should know about you that's not anything I've said so far.
Mary, great to be with you. Thank you to Liz for all your work and putting this together. And Susan, it's always a pleasure to work with you as well. First, thank you for hosting us and hosting this conversation. I'm really honored that we get to talk about this film that Amani and I made. But to your question, Mary, what's in my background that you didn't say? I mean, it's probably worth mentioning that I'm the son of a preacher and a teacher. I think that's probably going to come up a good bit. My dad's a United Methodist pastor. My mom's a public school teacher. And that I'm also the grandson of an activist. I'm going to talk tonight about my grandmother and the role that she played in this film, really being the inspiration, the way that she agitated and organized in her church and in her community. And so I think that like all of us, I'm a product of our origins. And all of those hyphens that you talked about, I think that they taught me that what's important is the impact that you want to have in the world, and to not be bound by title or occupation, And so I think I would call myself a community organizer or community builder, or as you would say when you were at the Dean School, a change maker. And the beauty of that is it allows us to transcend title and really focus so much about, you know, the impact that we want to see in the world. And I know that that's going to be a lot of the conversation that we're going to have today.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And so I'm looking forward to hearing you speak. Amani, come on in here. So I too have a pretty lengthy biography about our second co-presenter, Imani Cheers. But I want to just tell you a couple things. Imani, you are an associate professor of digital storytelling at the George Washington University and a cultural curator. You've written books. You're a professor, you have a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD, and tell us something about you that makes this work sing. It makes it so important to you.
Mary, thank you so much for having us. Thank you, Liz. Jason, as always, it's so good to see you and be in this space with you. I wish it was in person. We've done this before in person. I miss our in-person events. I will say that. But yes, Mary, what I would like to even acknowledge, because I'm sitting on my iPad and not my laptop, because I'm Isaiah's mom, and I am here serving as a mother, as a Black woman, but a storyteller and a cultural curator. And I'm really grateful for those who might not know me. I am the class of 2002, so we just celebrated our 20-year reunion back in June last month. It was absolutely amazing. I'm so grateful. I've served on our reunion committee from our first year to our 5th, our 10th, our 15th, and our 20th. So I'm just grateful to be a part of this community, and I'm just honored to be able to have this conversation today. And support this phenomenal film and this story of Jason and his family. So I'm grateful to be here. Thank you all.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you for collaborating in that introduction.
Yes,
so we are going to get to the film very quickly. And by the way, I just saw a chat pop up that people are highly recommending it. So if you've seen the film, put your ideas and your feedback and what inspired you in the chat for sure, because we want to be very interactive. Before I get quite to the film, I need to ask you how on earth both of you got to be making this film together. What was that journey? And many times, because I know for a fact that we have students on the line, our students think this is a straight line to get from where they are right now at WashU to where you are. And I have a feeling that this was a journey for both of you. And so talk a little bit about the journey from you sitting in a WashU seat to being here right now this evening. What are some of the key milestones or twists or turns on that journey that led you here? In either one, if you want to go ahead.
Ooh, Jason, do you want to lead off with that? I got some ideas, but
yeah, I can talk a little bit just about kind of my journey, and then would love to sort of, you know, honor Imani and the role that she played in allowing this film to be made. So, Mary, you couldn't be more spot on. We talk about sort of the scatter points in the journey. When you look backwards, it seems all makes sense. But when I articulate that, you know, I left WashU to go into politics. I got frustrated by politics and I went to law school. Law school led me back to politics. I worked in the Obama administration, and then my grandmother got sick, right? So I had been busy trying to climb the ladder on the treadmill, you know, whichever metaphor you want to accept. My 95-year-old grandmother went into the hospital. And it just so happened to be the same hospital that she introduced me to the idea of service when I was 5 and 6 years old. I got dropped off at her house, and she would carry me with her to go volunteer at the hospital, sit in rooms where people were often at the end of life, and rooms I was scared to go into. But she showed me this gift of what you can do with your life, to be present, to make people's life easier, better, be the daily devotional, be the calming spirit, be the strong and supportive hand. And so when she happened to now be in that exact same hospital, it became abundantly clear that I needed to sort of stop being on the trajectory I was on and go and sit with my grandmother. And by the grace of God, I got to hear her stories. She was still strong and lucid enough to tell me, well, she told me all the stories, but this story in particular was one that resonated with me, given where we were as a country, hearing how divided we are every day, and that division, having not been this divided since 1968. And yet to hear my grandmother articulate a story from 1968 about people coming together, I thought that was a story that we needed to share. Now, where I feel like Imani deserves a great deal of credit, I was not the storyteller at Washington University, right? I'm not a professional filmmaker. I don't have a BFA. I am not a curator of arts or programming. And so I knew that this was something that I wanted to tell, but I didn't know how. And so the gift that Amani gave me is in telling me that this story was significant, and telling me that this was a story that needed to be shared beyond our family, beyond our friend circle, and then to help me figure out how to actually tell that story. But she can sort of articulate her path post WashU and how we reconnected. And I guess you already articulated. I should say that our path together also started. We knew each other my freshman year, but then Imani had the great disservice and displeasure of being my RA sophomore year, her junior year, and she navigated that successfully, prayerfully, I'm sure. But it built the foundation. A lot of what I think we're going to talk about tonight is relationships. And so we happen to have a relationship that I've been able to lean on at different points in my career and trajectory. And this was a critical inflection point as I tried to figure out what to do with this story that my grandmother told me.
Terrific. So inspiring. So Amani, I'm not going to ask you what he was like as a freshman, but I am going to ask about your journey, from an RA to the place that you have journeyed onto. And so talk a little bit about that story.
Yeah, Mary, thank you. And I think Jason really was able to articulate quite poignantly. I came to WashU from a storytelling background. So my father was a photojournalist for Ebony and Jet magazine for 30 years. I came to WashU from Johannesburg, South Africa. We had lived in the Washington, D.C. area for many years, and both of my parents are from St. Louis, actually. But at the time that I applied to WashU, we were living in Johannesburg, and my father was Ebony, the managing editor of Ebony and Jet magazine. So I come from a storytelling background. I come from the understanding of the way in which images can be used to not only celebrate communities, but to truly document history, and the importance of the documentation and the acknowledgement of that history. So it was an honor for me to come to WashU and to be able to really find my tribe, to find my community, to find individuals that believed in the importance of reclaiming a narrative in a time when that wasn't even something that actually was a thing, right? We hear it now, the people love to use the term like, we're reclaiming a narrative. But, in 1999 and 2000, 2001, it just wasn't the phrase of the day. So I had the opportunity, as Jason mentioned, to meet him early in my WashU career. I was always adamant. I was a co-founder of a program called B-Side, which was a curator of culture. And that program ran from 2000 all the way to 2007. And it was the importance of honoring, this is on WashU TV, importance of honoring Black life, Black culture, and Black stories. So that's where it really came from. And when Jason reached out to me, in 2013, I was actually pregnant with my son, Isaiah, who's now 8 years old, but I was pregnant with him, and he said, I have an idea, and I have a story, and I've been talking with my grandmother, and I've been listening to her. Most importantly, I think talking is one thing, but he had been listening to her, and he'd been listening to the testimonies that she had, and he was like, we have to capture this. There's no way that we can let this go on. So it was really a no-brainer. I'm not gonna lie. I was blessed to be able to get in on the ground level of the idea that I want to document and honor our elders while they're still here.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful. I have so many things to ask you about your background. My first trip to South Africa and the continent was 2000, and storytelling in the history of that country and the continent plays an incredible role. But I'm not going to go there. I am going to go to storytelling messages.
Sure.
This film, good storytellers have messages that make a profound impact on you. And so when I watched the film, I know what I would say was the impact on me. What were you both trying to convey? What messages do you hope that I can see a lot of people watch the film? And so I want them to think about that question too. What did they take away? But what were you hoping that your audience would really, with the gift that they would receive from you through this film?
Jason?
Yeah, happily. And maybe, Marianne, let me tee up just a little bit for those that haven't had an opportunity to
Please.
When I was starting to make starting this process, one of the things that we would hear was the story is complex. There's a story of churches, there's a story of schools, there's a story of community, there's a story of family, and we got pushed to simplify the story. There's too much going on here. And as we sat with that, we realized that, life is complex. The issue of identity is complex. Race is complex. Sexual orientation is complex. The way in which we deal with belonging is complex. And our communities are complex. And so we realized that we needed to sort of keep that complexity in the story. And so I would say that the story sort of begins talking about three churches in a community. And it ends really understanding community within a congregation, right? Community within a church. Obviously, we're talking about the unlikely merger of three racially segregated churches. There were two white congregations in this community of Prince Orchard. There was one African-American congregation. And the evening of April 4th, 1968, which happens to also be the night that Martin Luther King was assassinated, those churches ended up merging together and becoming a purposefully integrated congregation. That is a story of not allowing our history to define our future. And it's, when you lift it up, it's a story about community. It's right where you started this conversation, Mary. It's about, where are we as a we? How do we define we? How large are we willing to think about we? And what we wanted to demonstrate, when you think about themes to pull apart, I was hearing this story from my grandmother about 1968. At the same time, I was reading and hearing the narrative about 2013 and 14 and 15, which was saying that we are irreconcilably divided. And there was almost an apathy about that division, and it's something that was happening to us, and people lacked agency to do anything about it. And so one of the most important takeaways for me is to remind people that we have the opportunity and the responsibility to shape and change our communities, and that we aren't simply the recipients of what is happening to them, that we have this opportunity to engage and to improve. And there's a concept of doers do that we'll talk about at some point, that we really want people to leave this film reminded that they have the responsibility to put their shoulder to the boulder and affect change in their own communities. But one of the things that I love is, and Imani taught me this about art, is that other people have different interpretations and different takeaways. And so I'm always curious to hear, Imani, from your perspective, and Mary, even from yours, what are the themes that, Imani, you want to lift up?
Yeah, I think Mary and Jason, that was so beautiful. First of all, Jason, that was phenomenal. And as an truly an outsider, Mary, I think that's the important part. Like, Jason came with a very, very, very personal, story. This wasn't like, hey, I have a random idea about, et cetera. He was like, no, this is about my grandmother. And I was like, oh, okay. And like, my grandmother was just right. It was a very compounded and compact story, and it dealt with faith, and which is also obviously very personal. And then, having the opportunity to meet and engage with on a deeper level, because I'd met his parents, before it, but like, here we are now, like I'm sitting in their home, like I'm sitting in his grandmother's home. I'm at church with them. My son is at church with them, running around children's church in the corner. Like it was just the most, if you can imagine, like just a very intimate experience. And what I hope that the individuals take away from and community groups, right, as they watch this film, that they take away is the importance of community, moving through crises, which was also very, very critical. It was Jason's grandmother, who was still living and kicking, and literally, I mean, one of the most phenomenal people I've ever met in my entire life. And I have been blessed to meet the likes of a Nelson Mandela and a Desmond Tutu, and even a Barack Obama. And then I've met like Ida Pearl Green, right? Like these are like, they're all like in my trifecta, like in my house, right? Like this woman is up there because she has seen it all, and her ability and understanding of life and the complexities of life is one of the most amazing things that I've ever experienced, and the way in which she even delves into the crises that this country was dealing with, whether it be in the 1960s, but also in the 2000s. And I mean, like 2020s was also very, very, very powerful for me as just someone who had the privilege and honor to like literally sit at her feet and listen to her is absolutely amazing. So I hope that the idea of community is really transparent for individuals who haven't seen this film, but hopefully who will also watch it.
Yeah.
Can I share one moment? That's just
Please.
So funny. So Imani saying my grandmother and brother, thank you for that. That's beautiful. I remember this one moment where Imani was interviewing my grandmother and was really trying hard to set up a beautiful grandmother-grandson moment, And so she says, Grandma Green, did you ever think that you would live to see a Black president? And Grandma Green says, no, I never thought in my lifetime that I would see it, And she then says, and did you ever think that you would have a member of your family working in the White House for the first Black president? And my grandmother goes, well, if there's going to be a Black president, then yeah, maybe. Yeah. And Amani was like, well, okay, I tried to tee you up, Jason, for this beautiful moment. She was like, well, if we're going to be there, then we're going to be there, which is just so beautiful. It's just so my grandmother. She was like, if we're going to be making history, then we might as well be there making history.
That's right.
And we're going to be present for that history, which was one of the most poignant moments of that experience, where she was like, yeah, like the thoughts and ideas that, are the generation prior and the pre-generation prior, we were like, we couldn't see past a segregated country and the violence of a segregated country. And she full on was like, oh no, like if it was gonna happen, my ancestors were gonna be there. And I was like, yes, ma'am.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I also think, again, just watching this film, it's a story of fearlessness and fear. It's a story of courage and setting aside, things that existed and going with vision. It is, it's how I think about the role of grandmothers. It's wise, but she was also ordinary, Jason, too, and she did extraordinary things. Mm-hmm. And I think that you know, I'm going to have you kind of respond a little bit to that ordinary and extraordinary, because it sets up my next question about you students in the audience that is like, I really want to be him and her and Nelson Mandela, but the space, it looks like that I'd have to journey. What's it? How do you be ordinary and extraordinary, you know, in this film at the same time? And what advice do you kind of get people that can say, you might admire Jason, you might admire Imani, but you also are them. If you can give some advice to those students, because there's a distance between that freshman dorm and you all on this webinar tonight.
Absolutely, Mary. I like to say that there is a power in the mundane. There's a power in the everyday.
That's right.
And this idea of ordinary, extraordinary in the ordinary is one of the things that gravitated me towards this story. That there wasn't, this wasn't an edict that came down from on high. This wasn't change that came from Washington. You know, this is something that, frankly, President Obama would say a lot. Change doesn't come from Washington; it comes to Washington. And the same thing about communities, that this happens where ordinary people look around their community, they see a need, and they take action, and that is impact at scale. You know, one of the things that one of my, you know, aha, eye-opening moments was when my grandmother was telling me the story of my great-great-grandfather, who we articulate and capture some of his story in the film. Right after emancipation, he works with some others in the community to help build a schoolhouse in the community. This is the first colored schoolhouse. And the reality was there was no public education for Black children in Quince Orchard. And so they built a schoolhouse. They hired a teacher, they bought the land, they hired a teacher, they built the schoolhouse. And they had an immediate need. He had 7 children. His neighbor had 4 or 5. They needed to educate their kids for a better life. They didn't know that that schoolhouse was going to become the center and the cornerstone of the Black community. They didn't know that that schoolhouse would educate hundreds of children. They didn't know that because of the concept of education that they instilled in their generations, that, you know, kids would go to Washington University, that their descendants would go to Yale Law School, right? But it is a direct correlation to the investments and sacrifices that were made in 1865 and 1868 to build a community and to build these institutions of community and to pour and invest in them and to the people that they would benefit. That's the same. We can't always know that, you know, when we plant the seed, where it will blossom and which fruit it will bear, but we plant the seed, right? And we do that work and recognize that that work in and of itself is important and significant. And in this context of this film, that's the work that people had been doing. It's the courageous work that you talk about, not knowing, you know, a descendant yet unknown, but benefits from that investment that was made so many years ago.
It's amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, Mary, I just to jump on and echo everything Jason said, as my son is running around trying to like eat fruit snacks and
Listen,
Doritos.
you have sown a seed right there. That young man is doing something someday.
He's working, you know, he's been running around this film since birth. So this moment right now is also not lost on me, probably, or Jason. But what I find really, really powerful about the entire story and the way in which it came together, and also the importance of the story in a place and time, you know, historically, but also contemporarily. Yeah. And that is what I hope people take away from this personally, is that this is not something that is set in 1964. Like, this is truly, when we look at the way in which interracial, interfaith communities are able to bring about change in their communities, like, it is so much more than, oh, what happened then. We're seeing that now, and the understanding and realization that for any true progress, it has to be a literally all hands on deck, everybody involved. This is not a Black issue, a white issue, an Asian issue. everyone has a Christian issue, like everyone has to be all in. And that is what was so phenomenal to me about learning and truly understanding what was happening in this community at the time, and how, again, the relevance to, I mean, we started filming in 2014. So I just want to be like mindful for anyone who might be like, oh, this is like really cute then. No, we started filming in 2014. A number of, and I was fortunate because I always take like production photos and everything, but I sent Jason pictures because Google Photos will be like, hey, like, remember, where you were on this date, like 8 years ago.
Right.
And I was able to be like, do you remember Miss Ida? Jason, you remember you said Miss Ida? And Miss Ida was what, 98, Jason, when we interviewed her. And that was 7 years ago. And God bless that woman. She's since left us. But the understanding and the importance of capturing and truly documenting like the history and the stories of individuals that are no longer with us. And it isn't necessarily just based on age, but the change makers who are so passionate. It's popular now to be interracial, interdisciplinary, interreligion. That was not the case when Jason's grandmother and all of her contemporaries were doing this work. They were pariahs in all intents and purposes in many of their communities. These were especially Black women, white women who were, they're like, no, we think that our churches could come together and we could worship together. And this was not a welcomed viewpoint. So it's amazing to see what the story that we were capturing for decades, 5-6 decades ago, is really relevant today.
Well, that same kind of feedback, that same kind of discouragement is likely to happen in today, when you're trying to really do something that matters. So I'm going to tell the audience, if you're on YouTube watching us, unfortunately, we can't take your questions, but if you are here, to start populating that chat with questions, because I'm getting to you very soon. I want to ask just a couple of other individual questions. And I'm going to try to tie, Amani, what you just said together about encouragement. Jason had a grandmother that says, well, of course he'd wind up in the White House. I might not have said as strongly as that. But Amani, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to go, Jason, I have to ask about the president, so that question's next, right? But Amani, I'm going to start with you. I'm from a very working class background. So if I had told my mother and father, my father who fixed telephones his whole life, that I was going to become a filmmaker, a storyteller, a cultural curator, he would have something to say about that. So I want you to kind of just talk about, the encouragement, the crisis point where you said, am I going to make this? Am I going to make the talk to our audience, especially the students, about how you navigate that journey. Where when folks are on your side, that's great. But I bet you there's a few folks that had you saying something else. How do you stick to it and really follow the things that are your gifts and your passion? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely, Mary. And I'm going to tell our audience, what some of them do know. I'm really blessed. Gordon Parks, I'm going to throw out a name that people, hopefully many of us know on this call, but some of our younger audience might not know. He was a mentor of my father's, and he was a figure in my household well before I knew exactly who he was. So I'm very blessed, similar to Jason, where, I grew up in an incredibly supportive and creative household where being a creative wasn't exactly, my father was a photojournalist, right? So and my father is a photojournalist from Normandy, St. Louis. Hello, everyone who went to Normandy High School So
Very
very
nice.
clear about that, right? Like he is, my mother went to Beaumont High School. These are St. Louis City.
Oh, she's from St. Louis, because now we're talking high
Yes, ma'am.
schools, Jason. Here we are.
Right. Yes, ma'am. No, these are very much so, local, as my grandmother to this day will say, everyday folk. And it was an understanding that this was a creative path, but it wasn't easy for my father. It wasn't easy for me when I showed up to WashU and the summer of 1998 and declared a major in photography. It was like, what are you doing? You could be anything else. Why is this where you're going? Are you sure you don't want to do business or engineering or go into another field? And I stood firm with the understanding and the acknowledgement that creativity was a career path. And it was a way in which that I could support myself. And so for any young person who is watching this webinar, tuning into this conversation right now, that is questioning whether or not they could be successful in a creative path, I would challenge them to truly believe in themselves, but also to really put themselves out there. We are currently living in a phase and a state, and because of course, as you knew, we did, but I am a professor at GW at George Washington University in DC, and I'm really grateful that a WashU former president, Mark Wrighton, is my current president here at GW. I was able to serve on his Provost leadership team for a year as he transitioned. It was truly a full circle moment for me. Anything is possible. If you would have told my 17-year-old self when I showed up at WashU, June of 1998, that the current chancellor and I, 22 years later, I would be serving on his Provost leadership team, I would never, at first I would never have believed you, but I would never have thought that was possible. So I will tell anyone who's listening that whatever your wildest dreams that you haven't dreamt are possible. We do not and should not ever limit ourselves. And yes, this cliche with hard work, you can do all things, but also with a firm faith in yourself, a firm faith in whomever your higher power may be, you can do things that you haven't even conceived of yet.
Wow.
And it doesn't help to know really good people like Jason Green. But I'm
Correct. Correct. Your friends do matter. The people that you surround yourself really, really do matter. They do. And, but that's inspiring. So, when any audience member gets the kind of thought, I want to be her when I grow up, that was amazing. So thank you. So Jason, I have the privilege of coming from Chicago originally. That South Side neighborhood that President Obama worked in, I spent some time, quite a bit of time there after him. And so tell me about the route that Jason Green takes, that he came to believe that he belonged in the White House, supporting, serving, helping succeed our first Black president. What was that journey like? What kind of audaciousness did it take? What kind of opportunities and circles? Just to talk to me just a little bit about that and what that meant for you.
I don't think I quite had the audacity of my grandmother. So I don't think I knew that that was in my future. And frankly, just for a moment, I'll talk about the campaign. I had worked on John Kerry's campaign in 2004, and all we ever discussed was which job we were going to have in the White House. Probably why we lost. On the campaign in 2008, I don't remember spending a moment's time thinking about what position I would ever want in the White House. I was so committed. I ran our national voter registration program to do my part in trying to move this moment and be a part of this movement. That when he did win, I sort of thought that I was going to go back on the legal path and go to a law firm in New York and do that work. And I got a call to come and interview for a job opportunity in the White House counsel's office. there's a backstory there that for another time. But I was fortunate enough, and relationships do matter. That call came from a relationship from a friend who gave me the opportunity, and I had to go and win it. But then once I was actually in the White House, I remember a moment that perhaps will resonate with some of the students or others that are listening. Early in our tenure, we had a meeting, and it was in the Situation Room, which has a heft to it already, right? So I walk in, and I had just graduated from law school. I was the youngest attorney. I was the only Black guy there. Everyone else had clerked. Everyone else had worked for a big firm. It was a known name. And I kind of felt like I was the campaign hire, throwing a bone to the campaign. And so in many respects, I thought that I had a lot to learn, and I could sit and be quiet. And so we walked into the Situation Room, which is effectively just a big conference room with significant technical capabilities, but it's just a conference room, right? So in the middle, there's a conference room table with chairs around it, and around the broader room, there's another set of chairs around the periphery. And I walked in the room, surveyed the scene, and slipped into one of those chairs on the periphery by the door. And I watched others come in, and some did what I did. A couple went to the table, and it was interesting. Once the boss finally arrived, he was running a little bit late. He looked around at the chairs that were sitting open around the table and looked at us who were sitting so comfortably on the periphery. And he said, "What are you waiting for? Take your seat at the table, because we've got work to do." And that's what I think, and it sort of reminded me, one, that nobody else was coming, but two, for all the reasons that I thought I should be silent were actually the reasons that I should be speaking up. That in that room, there wasn't anybody else with my set of experiences that had been the places that I had been. It would have been a unique law firm perspective, to use that example, rather than my sort of public sector background. And so it's a reminder to sort of, be the PhD of me and sort of use the experiences that have gotten me in the room to know that I'm supposed to be in the room and sharing those experiences. And, I equate this, I can draw that line back to WashU. The themes of community that present themselves in this film, the way that I view the world in many respects was seeded during my tenure. I was there from 99 to 2003. In a philosophy that Dean McLeod really permeated the campus with, this idea that students be known by name and by story. And that was my introduction to community, taking the time. Imani said earlier, sometimes we talk, but it's about that listening component. So taking the time to listen and know somebody else's story and know somebody else's name, those are the tenets that build strong community. And so it's like knowing who you are and whose you are. Like that comes from that sort of work. And so anyway, when you talk about the president, it's that story for me that just sort of was so resonant, and then guided me during the rest of my tenure, and ultimately allowed me the courage to leave. Now, I wasn't sure that in 2013, remember, he had 4 more years.
Yeah.
And I decided, that I had to go and sort of be present to finally listen and hear the story from my grandmother that the time was present, and to know that that is exactly where I was supposed to be and the work that I was supposed to be doing.
Tremendous.
Mary, I'm going to jump in here 2 seconds because Jason just mentioned the GOAT of all GOATs. With Dean McLeod, I don't think either one of us would be here right now if it wasn't for his wisdom and his insight. And I find myself for many of us who have actually read and practiced our habits of achievement, right? Like it is a consistent, it's just a mantra, right? For our daily lives is understanding that. So yeah, I know Jason, I share this, that we credit any success, yes, to our families, yes, to the foundations that they set for us, but those foundations led us to WashU that introduced us to Dean McLeod, and he, picked up the torch. And Jason is this, dare I say, for you also, but he led us to like the next phase in our lives.
And just a contemporary note about Washington University, part of my new day job is really kind of catalyzing our university strategic plan that applies that name and story to every member of our community, every student, every faculty, every staff member, that the strength of what we can do in the world is really how much we support and help our people, our community thrive, and then also our neighbors. You are getting a lot of love here. Normandy School District is in the house in the chat. The inspiration, strength, the confirmation of success that you shared here. So keep those kind of notes coming as I go forward to a couple of the questions that have been submitted by our audience members. So I'm going to put a particular spin on this first question because, people want to not only watch this film, but they want to bring this film to their communities. And there's one of our audience members that really wants some advice about how do you engage the church community? I mean, I'm actually sorry that this has to even be a question, I'll be honest, right? But how do you engage the church community to be able to embrace the messages of this film, particularly those that need some inspiration around kind of faith in action? And so talk a little bit about how you'd approach churches, how you'd mobilize churches. What would you be thoughtful about? Because we want people to be successful with your film, and so we want people to pick it up and be sharing it and discussing it. And so, in a particular church context, what advice would you give?
I couldn't tell if you were trying to get there, man. I'll be quick. Well, that actually is the beauty of film, right? If you say, hey, you want to come to a lecture and hear about how you should be an anti-racist church, people will, you will have a self-selecting group. This film is an opportunity to get folks proximate. This is an opportunity to begin the conversation, to see a story about the way in which 3 racially segregated congregations did this historically. And what you find, Mary, is that when people are raising their hands and have comments about the film, they're really talking about themselves, and they're talking about their own community,
That's
they're
right.
talking about their own church, but it gives them an opportunity to reflect. And that's the beauty of art, right? It's like we can comment about it. I like this part, I didn't like this part, I have questions about this. And so, we've been really fortunate. You talk about, Amani mentioned sort of beyond our dreams. When we started this project, this was an archival capture because people like Mrs. Howard were 99 years old, and we've lost the majority of individuals that were interviewed in this film have passed on. It's a new responsibility for us to carry their story forward. Then we ended up making a documentary, and PBS ended up picking it up. So that's when folks, the link that I saw get put into the chat already, PBS has run this film. We've reached 98% of the PBS stations across the country. The film is broadcast some 1,000 times this year, which is amazing. But any individual can access it and watch it, or bring it to their communities, or bring us. The website to go to for that is findingfellowship.film. That's where you can get links directly to the film, but also can be in communication with us, because we do a lot of this work to show the film, have conversations with church congregations, with community institutions, with anyone who's really thinking about these ideas of home and belonging and bridging division, and thinking how we engage in an anti-racist way in a racist world, right? How do we actually have those sorts of conversations? And so we welcome the interest. We know that there is hesitation and sometimes skepticism depending upon the audience, but what we need to do is push past what have traditionally been called safe spaces and really have courageous spaces.
Correct.
Courageous conversations.
Correct.
Where we can actually engage proximately have the tension, but do it in an authentic and humble way so that ultimately we can sort of push through to reach those moments of synthesis, which is all what we're all searching for.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
the
I'll
website,
just jump in. Sorry, Mary, very quickly. I'll just jump in because I can't, I mean, just to echo everything that Jason said, but also too, it's one thing about having, safe conversations, but also those like solid and secure ones. I truly believe that we are at a and everyone loved to say, because we felt it in the film, right? Like, I mean, one of the key moments in the film is when church parishioners learn that that Martin Luther King Jr. has been killed, and what does that mean for these communities, for these individuals? And I think that it's just that really, really important. The notion that although pivotal moments in our society are critical, it's really about the everyday moments. But yes, these nationwide, like these huge moments are critical. But it's the everyday. It's how you show up for your community members every single day that are also, or every Sunday, right? It's every Sunday. It's not the April 4th Sundays, but it's literally every single week, every single day. And that's what I really hope. And I don't want to speak for Jason, but I feel like he agrees with me on this. That's what we really hope that individuals and in particular faith-based communities, piggyback on. It's not about practicing a doctrine that is separating. I am very passionate about what, where this country is on major issues such as like Roe v. Wade, and like what does that mean, and the way in which as communities, as faith-based communities, we can look at a variety of issues and have just really productive conversations.
I so appreciate your comments, and I'm trying to read the chat and tie what you're saying together. And you mentioned the word hope. If we survey the state of the kind of polarized politics, if we kind of see, sometimes what happens to leaders as they try to lead in this very tense, conflictual, passionate space. This next question is from an audience member that relates to hope. How do you keep your hope alive? How do you keep the motivation to do hard work? I mean, fundamentally, are you hopeful? What fuels that? And then I'm going to read this question in the chat, and that's probably going to be our last one as we have our last 5 minutes. But talk to me a little bit about what keeps you going, and reassure our next generation audience that they should have hope, because there's a lot of things to signal maybe that is not wise. So go ahead, Jason. I see you unmuted.
There were times in the last few years, Mary, where I was really challenged with that question.
Yeah.
Where it was just hard to be a Black man in America.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if there was room for a story of community.
Yeah.
And, man, she's been a theme in this conversation, but I had a praying grandmother. I remember sitting with my grandmother, and these words are in the film where she said, it takes a long time sometimes, but we got to keep working. And really what this film process became for me, if we look back, King wrote a prophetic piece before he was assassinated, and it was called Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? And I think we've seen a lot of examples of chaos and mayhem. We don't get to see a lot of examples of community, and that doesn't mean that they're not there. In our communities around the country, I believe that there are people that are doing very regular people, ordinary people, that are doing very powerful, self-sacrificing, intentional things in their community. And it's important that we raise up those stories. And that's really what this is. This is an opportunity and an argument to show kind of what is possible, to remind us. I think so often we see the examples of chaos and we're told this is who we are.
Yeah.
And in those moments, perhaps that's right, but we also need to be demonstrated and reminded of who we can be and what's possible. And so that's the hope. That's the responsibility that we have, is to sort of commit ourselves again to let our light shine, not to hide it behind the bushel, but in our neighbor's house every day, to Imani's point, that we have that responsibility to let our light shine. And in so doing, other people's light will shine. In telling the story of the possible, I think we've freed other communities. And I hear it all the time. We want to tell our story now. And the telling of the story over and over and over means that somebody will hear it. And somebody will take that kernel of inspiration and hope and demonstration of the possible to carry that on and move forward.
Jason, that's good. And I want to, because, as you were chatting, I was able to kind of peek in the chat. So I want to give a shout out to Larry Clark, my mentor, WashU alum. I see Sean Coyner, shout out, love Sean. Actually, Jason, if you saw, he gave you a question. So I'm not going to answer your question, but I saw it. So check that out in the chat. But Mary, just to kind of, at least for me, kind of wrap up a little bit. And I hope everyone realizes that this is not an end of the conversation. We're really pausing it. I do want to let you know, and Liz and everyone will be able to provide resources for anyone here who would like to. Hey, Tina Evans. Hey, Tina B. I see people. Thank you all so much. And Tish, my line sisters, and my people out here. But we really want to make sure that this conversation, again, is continuing, and the idea of legacy, but of honoring our phenomenal, individuals who are leading the path for us and what we can continue to do to create change and do work. So yeah, this work does not end. This film is not, the credits might roll, but that's really a pause. It's a pause in the story, and it's a story that is hopefully people will see in their own communities, and they'll be inspired to really. Jason inspired me. My grandfather passed at 98 years old in April of this year, and one of the things that with Jason and being a part of this project, I was able to do was to have these really introspective conversations with him the last 5 years. And so I hope that anyone listening to this, when they think of do I have elders in my family? Do I have elders in my community that I should be spending time with and listening to and going to where they are, to their homes, and I know, yes, we're in a pandemic, but talk to them, record their conversations, engage with them, listen to them, sit at the feet of our elders and give them their flowers when they're able to smell them.
That's fantastic.
And to see them and to acknowledge them. It's easy once people have passed, but I hope that anyone here takes away a key point for me is that the power of the stories of our elders and the importance of listening, valuing, and sharing them.
Yeah, thank you. So with that, I'm going to say a couple things. Isaac is one lucky kid to have you as his mom. You too, Jason.
Yes, Isaiah is
Isaiah.
The one. Yep.
Isaiah is one lucky child to have you as his mom. Jason, I have admired you every time we have spoken. You have inspired me. And I hope that as I pledge to be a partner in this work with both of you, that everybody in the audience does that as well. And so I thank you. It's been a privilege and an honor to talk with you tonight. And I'll be talking to my children, and I'm now a grandmother, that little baby about this evening as I go to dinner. So thank you. Please thank the Alumni Association, stay involved, go to the websites, watch the film, share it. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for this evening's conversation. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Imani.
Thank you, Imani. Thank you very, very much. We so appreciate it. And thanks all in the audience.